Thank you everybody for joining us for our PD session today. Before we look at the website itself, what I want to do is to get sort of an idea of what assessment looks like as far as SmarterMarks is concerned. We can sort of start here at building an assessment. We take that assessment that we've built, we administer that, and these days that might be online, that might be on paper. Either way, we get these student responses in, and then what we want to do is we want to interpret those results, and we want to get a couple of things from that. So the first is we want to get some feedback for students, and we want that to go beyond just one grade. So we want feedback that students can use to know where they are in their learning, and also what the next steps might look like for them going forward. We also want feedback for teachers. And of course, some of that's going to be where's my class at? And maybe are there things that we need to touch base on before we move forward? But also, of course, we're going to come back around and we're going to wind up giving this assessment again next semester or next year, something like that. And so we want feedback for teachers as well that makes it so that when we go back to build that assessment again or to refine that assessment, we're building assessments that are giving students as many opportunities to demonstrate their learning as possible, and also as many or as good feedback as possible. Just to sort of expand on that a little bit here, I guess, those feedback pieces before we look at the website. I wanted to start off showing you guys here a couple of pieces of feedback. And so again, when we look at our student feedback, we want to go beyond just saying you got 76% on this assessment. We want to do, for instance, outcomes scores. So we want students to have some idea of how they're doing on the specific outcomes that we're trying to address with this assessment. And then down here, we've got a bunch of other information. We can configure this to give students whatever we're looking for, depending on our goals with this assessment. As far as the teacher end goes, we'll look we'll look in a little more depth here later. But for instance, things that this might include. So up top here in this view, we've got some basic statistics that are going to tell us whether or not our assessment is doing its job. So whether or not this assessment, again, is giving students that chance to demonstrate their knowledge. In addition, for each item, we might want to get like a detailed idea of what kinds of responses students are giving. And again, that might give us some idea of the quality of these items, but also of what our students' misunderstandings are. So just to give a quick overview here, I guess we'll start off way over here with the help section, because I think that one's really important. For anything that's not the online assessment, you'll find a lot of detail here in terms of how you can build assessments on SmarterMarks, in terms of building items, running them, all of that. In addition, in this first screen here, we have what is now a bit of an older PD session, but we'll be replacing that with something a little newer. Here we have something that will run through the same kind of stuff that we're going to run through today. Coming back then, we're going to look at, to start off with, just building a form for an assessment you already have. And I think probably most of the people here are interested in building the assessments themselves on SmarterMarks. But once in a while, we have an assessment that we've already built. It's sitting off somewhere else, and we just want to build a response form so that we get better feedback for ourselves and for students from that. So we'll look at the start on building a form or a version here. If we want to actually build an assessment, then that's where we're going to use these other three. So we're going to start off by building questions. We're going to take those and incorporate those into an assessment template. And then finally, we have the option of either building a paper version or building an online sitting. And we'll take a look at all of that stuff today. Right. So just to look at the process here, or to talk about the process before we look at it. So the general, if we start off, say, with building a form here, or with building a version for an assessment that we've created, what we're going to do is we're going to build that. We're going to print a question book if we've got one, a response form for sure. We're going to take those response forms, hand them out to students, have them complete them. When we get those back, then we can scan those in as a PDF, and that might be using the photocopier you have at school. That might be using like an app like Cam Scanner. We've had really good results with that as well. Either way, as long as you've got that PDF with all of your students' responses on it, you upload that, and then we're going to analyze that. And again, we'll take a look at that interpretation to get results for you and for your students. So to start off with, like I say, what I want to do is I want to look at that really simple case where we have an assessment that we've already built. But we just want to build a response form that's going to give us more feedback for that. So let's start off. We're in our forms and versions section. We're just going to hit new form here. And I want to show you guys that doing this sort of piece can be really, really fast, really easy here. So for instance, we could say this is our Math 10 trigonometry quiz. So we've got our Math 10 trigonometry quiz. We have options for how we're going to collect the students' names. So for example, if we wanted, we could really easily just change this to our first name, give it 10 letters, something like that. We've got a lot of customization here that we can do. We're going to leave this mostly alone. I do want to point out over on the scoring section here, so we can do this out of a total. We can do weighted sections. We can do weighted outcomes. Again, whatever is most appropriate to what you're doing in your class. And then again, with those student reports, we have a lot of configuration here that we can do as well. So whether or not you want to include the answer key, for example, how detailed you want those reports to be. So we're just going to leave all of that at the default. So we're going to say save. We're going to add a section here. Let's do a multiple choice section. We'll say maybe 5 multiple choice questions. We can key that right away here if we want, or we can leave that until a little bit later. So we're going to leave that key for now and just say save. We're going to add a numeric response section as well. And let's go with like 3 numeric response questions. We have a bunch of different numeric response options here. So you can do your decimal questions. You can do scientific notation. So this is where the question says the answer is the form A dot BC times 10 to the D. What are A, B, C, and D? For our math folks here, we have fractions. So that's sort of coming up, I think a few years back. This was introduced in the grade 6 PATs and is moving its way up now. So if you want to do fraction answers, you can definitely do that. And then finally, we have selection, which are like choose all of the above that match this statement or something like that. So we can just pick some things here. Well, let's go with a fraction. And then there we go. So we're going to say save. And right away, if I go print generic form, so here's our form. It has a space up at the top for students to enter their first name. We've got all of our custom fields here, including the ability to do those fractions that we needed. This is something that you could now, even before you've keyed it, you can go ahead and print it, bring it to your class, use it, and then sort of deal with the rest of this later. So there's a really nice opportunity here to take care of this, like on that morning when you've forgotten that you had something to do. We can do a bunch more with this though. So I'm going to come back. Once we've got our questions built, we can also add outcomes really easily. So we can say, for example, this is a trig quiz. So we could say, for instance, we have some questions about sine function. And we can choose whichever questions are appropriate to that outcome. And if you've got outcomes from the program of studies, for instance, that you want to paste in here, you can do that as well. The outcomes, we can have more than one outcome for each question if we want. So these can be not just curricular outcomes, but they can also reflect where this came in your class. So I've had really good success with flagging questions as being, say, as a science teacher, as lab work or in classwork or something like that. And again, the goal here is to give students that feedback that lets them know what they need to do moving forward. So we say save. We have our 2 questions now as a sine function. We could, for instance, say, holy cow, I can't type this morning. There we go. We can pick a question as Pythagoras if we want, for example. Come back to our multiple choice. We can do the same thing here. So we can say, oh, actually, these ones as well are Pythagoras, something like that. And now what's going to happen is if we were to scan this, if we were to print our form that we saw earlier, so we just go print generic form. We take this form, we hand it out to their students or to our students. Again, they fill in their responses. We bring those back and scan them in. What I want to do, let's actually go ahead. We're going to run through that process. So if I take this, so we're going to download this form. Ordinarily, we want this to get filled in as well, but just to show how this works. So we can come to our forms and versions. We can select that trigonometry quiz. We can say score, mark new scans. I'm going to select a PDF here. And I think that's going to my downloads. There we go. So this is a blank form, but we can use that anyway. Say upload. We have an option to put in any information about ourselves or this class in here, but we don't have to do that. So I'm going to say upload, and it'll take about half a second per page. And here we go. So if we were to look at these results, I think these are going to be really boring results because we have one blank page. But let's just come back to our forms and versions, and I'll show you something that we've got. This is like those cooking shows where they're like, and now in the other oven. So on our dynamics unit test here, I can say browse the scores we've already got. And in there, we've got a full class with statistics here. So for another assessment, here we are. We're at our results page. We can look, for instance, at our student reports. Let's take a look at that. So this is what we saw earlier, slightly different format maybe. We've got our outcomes up here. And in this case, these are sorted from the weakest to the strongest for each student. And so this lets them pick off what they need to work on right up the top here, and maybe what they can use to build that down below. And then we've got our remainder here. And again, one of these for each of our students. We can print these off, hand them out to our students. In addition to that, we've got our teacher summary here, which leads off with our score distribution, which in my mind is maybe the least important piece that's here. But if we look, we've got, maybe we need to do some work on difficulty, and we may talk a little bit about that today. We've got discrimination here. Discrimination looks at how closely each of these questions reflects student knowledge. But we can see that we've got questions here that are doing their job, that are giving students a chance to demonstrate what they know. So coming further down here, so we've got some basic statistics. We've got a collusion analysis. So if students are working together, we have a very detailed model of the class's results here that will tell us, for example, there's like a 1 in 10,000 chance or 1 in a million chance or whatever that this just happened by fluke. We have some outcomes, learning outcomes information for the whole class. And then we have a detailed item analysis here. While we're looking at this, the one thing that I want to point out maybe, so the red circles here are things that are serious issues. So when we're looking at, for instance, a multiple choice question that has an average that's down around 25% or less, this is a question that's actually just not doing its job. This is a question that's not letting students know what they know. Where we have the yellow triangles, this is sort of like a less severe problem, but maybe something worth looking at as we're moving forward. Our last piece here, so we have, for people who are looking for all of the student responses, all of the data that we've got, the XML summary is a really good way to do that. You can open that up in Excel. We have also a CSV that you can just upload probably straight to your grades program. So most of the stuff that we're going to see or that we want to use to configure that is in the results page where we saw it a little bit earlier. We do have some things that are squirreled off up here. And so if you click on your name and settings, under the report, so here's where you can do that sorting of outcomes. So we can sort them alphabetically or by score. So we have our outcomes. We have like a few other options here. While we're here, let me just take a look. If we were, for instance, really frequently changing that from name to first name, then we can just set that here and say, actually, this is what I would like to use with my class. I want to just do first names, and the students know how to work with that. We can say save changes. And now for any forms that we build in the future, all of that's going to be reflected. So if we come back to our forms and versions, we open up our scores, save view. And so let's just check here. So the old one does have it from the weakest to the strongest. In order to change that over to alphabetically, we just need to hit rescore up at the top here. And this is the same if you make changes to your key, for example. And now when we view those reports, those are going to be all in alphabetical order. So that'll sort those however you have to sort those. So we've looked at building a form. You can build a couple of versions, say, if you've got a couple of versions of your test, but there are some limitations here. So if you have a version A and a version B that you're doing in your class, then what's going to happen is each of those is going to have its own separate set of statistics. And so we're not sort of taking full advantage of the size of your class there. But even more so, as we move from year to year, excuse me, we're just going to wind up continuing to get that like 15 or 20 students worth of statistics. And what we would like to do is to get a longer term sense of how our assessment is performing. So one of the things that we want to do is to make sure that we can gather those statistics over the longer term, but then we would like to be able to sort of version tests more easily as well. And I know that when I was building tests, say in Word, versioning them and versioning them without breaking them was a whole job of its own. So what we want to do is we want to look at building assessments on SmarterMarks, and that'll let us get into also administering those on paper as well as administering those online. So to start off with, we're going to go over to our question bank here. We have 3 places that you can get questions on SmarterMarks. One is you have your own folders here, and maybe you are building questions, and we will build one in just a moment here as an example. So you can build your own questions in here and use those. In terms of importing, so you can copy and paste text out, and we'll do that again momentarily here. But in terms of like automatically importing an entire assessment, we don't have that. And I think anybody who's sort of worked with somebody else's assessment and thought like, how did you manage to do the numbering this way, knows why that might be problematic. That said, in my experience, it takes, even for something like a unit test, maybe a half an hour to import that or to put those items in. And that's something that pays off right away. So we can build our own questions. We also have communities here. So our communities, we don't have any default communities. Communities are all built by teachers. So if you're looking for some communities to contribute to, then send me an email. I do have a few large communities that I happen to be part of that I'd be happy to add people to where that would be helpful to them. The other thing that you can do is to build communities yourself. So communities are intended to be used for everything from your working within a department, say, right to sharing across Alberta. While we're talking about that, actually, let's just look at building a community. So if we do want to build a new community, we can just say community, new community. We have our name here. We can add anybody who's already got a SmarterMarks account to that. And then over here, we have all of those controls that we can use to determine what this community is going to look like. So we can allow everybody to add. We can say only administrators can add. We can say everybody can add and everybody can delete. Again, it depends on what you want to do with this community. A little bit further down, so in particular, maybe a really important one. If you have a smaller community, then maybe you want just your administrators to be controlling that. If you are looking at a larger community, then you have also the opportunity to let any member add other members. And so you can get these communities that build really quickly. And I'm sure we'll see the advantages of that as we go here as well. So if we were to hit save, we would build that new community. I'm just going to hit cancel here. We have a bunch of communities here, and the advantage of communities is that we can sort these things by outcomes. We can, if you want to share assessments, for example, then you can do that. I would recommend doing that sort of only on a small scale, and we'll talk about the why really soon here. But communities are there. The third place that we can get items and share items as well. Here's the open question bank. So the open question bank always growing really quickly, and I really enjoy watching this number grow as we go through PD sessions. We're coming up now on 128,000 items here, and this is across a wide range of subjects, a wide range of levels. The open question bank is all questions that have been contributed by teachers. So if you are building questions, at some point, you're going to be presented with an option to to share all of your questions. And also you have the option to share questions individually to the Open Bank. If I could sort of sell that for a moment, there are a few things about the Open Question Bank that I think make it so that I would love to see everybody join this. One, actually, let's say if you're worried about security, then coming back to this idea of whether or not you should share assessments on communities. On a small community, I think sharing assessments can be a really good idea. When we get to a larger community, the problem is that if we have a student who is in another class, even in another school, if I share an entire assessment, then that's then something that maybe if they get their hands on it, that represents a real security risk. We have students who can say, well, this looks like Cooper's unit test or something like that. If we are sharing individual items, and in particular, if we can't sort of connect those to a teacher, then when you've got 128,000 questions, I want you to imagine sort of, even if students got access to this database, their odds of finding anything that makes this more than just a really great study tool are really slim. So the security, as long as we are just sharing questions, is much higher than when we're sharing assessments. If we look back at the website here, one of the things with that then is if I search for instance, like photosynthesis, and we can say science 10, all of the items in the Open Question Bank are indexed by the text of them, but also by any outcomes they've been used in, any assessments they've been used in. So just by using these items, you're helping to catalog them. So in particular, if we want a particular subject or a particular level, we can put that in here. If we say photosynthesis science 10, here's a bunch of questions. And we'll come back when we're building an assessment to take a look at this. But I just want to point out that this is something where I can't even tell you which of these questions are mine. So from a security standpoint, I think sharing questions to the Open Question Bank is a safe bet. The other thing here, so in addition to making it much, much easier for other teachers to update their assessments, one of the things about the Open Question Bank is it makes it so that you start collecting statistics on your questions that aren't just from your class and your tests, they're from teachers across Alberta. And so you go from what is a good, but let's say maybe not great picture of how strong your questions are and of how strong the opportunity is for students to demonstrate their knowledge, to what I think is actually a really, really robust reflection of how good your assessment is. So the Open Question Bank, I think, good for the people who are borrowing from it, good for the people who are contributing to it as well. So there's our three places that we can get items from. What I want to do is to look at building a question here. So we're going to come back to our home folder. We'll hit new question. We have a few options here. So we're going to actually build a question here that I've already got in Word. So this is from an old climate unit test of mine. We're looking at the specific heat capacity of water. And so we can just put that in here. And we'll see if this is really quick to take this item and move it over to SmarterMarks. If we were doing a matching question, then this would be our opportunity to put those answers in the context. So we could have like the provinces of Canada up in the context, and then we could ask students to match each down below. But we're looking at sort of a regular type of questions. We'll leave that at the default. We can choose to shuffle parts for our multi-part items, or we can uncheck that and sort of have a narrative through this question. And then again, on individual items, we can choose to share those to the Open Question Bank as well if we want. Sharing to the Open Question Bank, always opt in, and always something where you can take any individual question and say, actually, this one I don't want to share. So I'm going to say save. And now just before we actually enter this question, let's just sort of orient ourselves here. So every item has a few parts. We can start off with a context box. This is the piece at the top that would say, use the following information for the next 3 questions or something like that. We can include that or not as we want. And then down below, we can have 1 or more parts. So we've got 1 part right now. We can add other parts if we want, again, to make that like 3 questions that are related to 1 context, for example. So we are looking here. Oh, there we go. We are looking here at a response form type of multiple choice question. So I'm going to come back here. We're going to edit that question. We have multiple choice, numeric response, and written response questions. In terms of numeric response, we have those same options that we saw before. So we can do decimal, we can do scientific, fraction, selection questions, and we have a lot of options for how we want to mark those. Again, reflecting, for instance, if we want to allow small errors or something, if this is reading a graph, if we want to give students part marked for factor of 10, maybe they're just making a unit conversion error or something like that. These are all sort of pedagogical decisions that you can make. We have also written response questions, and for those, as was sort of alluded to by a question here earlier, we can write out a detailed rubric here. So if we're doing a question, we can say, we can have a diagram, say make that out of 3, and then say also we want to look at the students, I guess calculations would be a good thing. Just depending on how we want to mark that. When we give this as a paper assessment, one of the other advantages of this, I guess advantages or something that you want to think about is that your students are going to be able to see this as well. And so to me, one of the nice things in almost all cases is that this lets students know what's expected of them in terms of answering this written response question. For you, it means that if you do have written response questions that are broken up like this, it's much, much easier to go through and score them on those individual criteria. So we're going to come back to multiple choice. We're going to do a response table question here. And I'm just going to check here, but I believe, yeah, so this is just like our I and double I. So we can set up our labels as I and double I. Please go away, autocorrect. There we go. So we have I and double I, and then we can come right down here and get to our question. So I'm just going to take our text here, copy that. Paste it in here. We're going to take our blanks and replace those with actual proper blanks here with the I and our double I. And there we go. So we've got this piece sort of already in. Before we leave here, maybe we'll just take a quick browse across our options here for building questions. So we do have some sort of basic text formatting. We don't have anything with fonts here. And one thing that you're going to find is that when we're building assessments on SmarterMarks, there are a couple of goals here. And one is to make all of the items that we've got easily shareable. So if we've got, say, like that open question bank, that becomes a less powerful tool if you're spending a half an hour sort of changing anything, and I don't want to judge here, so I'll just say changing everything, say to or from Comic Sans. So we have no font choices here. The other reason for that is that I believe very strongly that students should be presented with sort of a consistent assessment format. They should know what they can expect. And so what we're looking to do here is to build assessments that look a lot like what they might see if they were looking at a diploma exam, for example, and to make sure that when they hit those other assessments, they're familiar with what they're looking at. So we have some more formatting here. We have the ability to do various kinds of numbered and bulleted lists. We have variables. So in particular, for everybody who's working in math, chemistry, physics, for sure, some of the stuff in biology as well, but we have the option to take anything where we've got a number and to turn this into something that's calculated internally. And so if we are building versions for a paper assessment, then that means that every one of those paper versions is going to have different numbers. If we are doing an online assessment, then that means that every single student is going to get different numbers. And so this can be really powerful in terms of exam security. We already saw our blanks. We can build tables here. We don't need to build a table on this one because a lot of what we need to do is going to be automatically taken care of, and we'll see that. We can add images, we can add equations, symbols, even so we can do, if we're doing something in, say, computer science, we can do code blocks here as well. So I'm just going to say save on that, and let's get ourselves some answers here. So if I come back, it looks like we've got low and high, slowly and quickly, and those are sort of run through. So we'll just enter those right away, and we'll worry about keying that in a moment. So we've got, let's see, this is going to be a high specific heat capacity, and temperature will increase slowly. So we want high and slowly. We can just change that value to 1 here. And now this is all keyed up and ready to go. So like I say, a lot of the stuff that's going to be in this thing is going to be generated for us, so we don't have to worry about keeping a consistent format. I'm going to say preview. And there's our preview, right? So this is already shuffled. We can look, we can make sure that that we've got our expected answer being keyed. We can make sure this thing all looks like we expect. So there's sort of like one item that we can build. Let's take a really quick look, just because I think this will be useful to the people who are here. Let's take a look at our variables as well. So we're going to build a new question. And we can just say, for example, if we were doing a really basic Pythagoras question, this might be like a table has a width of 2.5 meters and a depth of say 1.2 meters. The distance across the diagonal. It's not the most creative question ever. Is, I'm going to just say blank meters. We're going to make this a numeric response rather question in our decimal format. Let's just actually go through and we'll save that. If we were doing this as just a normal question, I'm going to pull out my calculator here now. My ability to do square roots and stuff in my head, not super awesome. There we go. So I've got 2.8. I guess if we go back here, it'd be really lovely if we say the distance across the diagonal, one decimal, for example. So we could take this right now. We could do a preview. There's our question. It looks exactly like we expect, but it would be really easy to make this something that we can use more often without compromising security here. So we can take this and just highlight our number here. And we can say this is our depth. Sorry, width is this one. This is our width. We're going to go say between 2 and 3 meters. We can do it in steps of 0.1. We'll make that to 1 decimal. Done. And there we go. That gets replaced with width. We can do the same thing with our depth. And let's see, let's make that go from 1 to 1.8. So we've got our width and our depth in. I'm just going to say save. And then we need to make our answer calculated. So new variable, and it's going to default calculated here for me. We'll say diagonal. Same thing as with the equation editor. We have actually a lot of shortcuts here that people will be familiar with. So we could use the square root, or we could just say backslash square root. And that lets us do this much easier and say this is depth squared plus width squared. And we want that to be to 1 decimal. The round immediately here is just if we're going to be using this in a calculation a little bit later. So I'll just leave that. This is our final answer. And now if we do our preview, we've really quickly taken this question to something where now it's 2.3 by 1.0, and we've got our answer here. We can reload. Now it's 3 by 1.2, and we've got our answer here. So really easy to make this something where even if students are aware of what this question is, they still need to know how to solve it rather than just what the answer is. So there we go. That's building questions. We'll take a look at an assessment template, and then we'll look at administering that in terms of paper, which will be really quick. And then we'll take a look at the online stuff as well. So if we want to build an assessment, let's actually take a look at an existing assessment before, just to give people an idea of what we're building toward. So once as we're building an assessment template, we sort of get a really nice view here of what questions we've got. Once we've got this built, we can really easily shuffle it to get brand new versions. Once we've shuffled it, we can build paper and online versions. Over here, we will take a look as well at putting learning outcomes in. So when we do this versioning, all of our versions have those learning outcomes already built in. It's building that form and that question book for us. As well, we'll come back and look at these assessment statistics when we go. Assessment templates have a lot of advantages in terms of of those statistics as well. One thing maybe actually before we leave here, because I think this is such an important piece, we're going to see these yellow tags a couple of places here. When you see these yellow tags, this is telling you that there's something in this assessment. For example, so this answer here is only being chosen by 0.4% of students. This one only by 5%. We'll take a closer look tomorrow at why that's a problem. But I want to suggest that when we see this, this is a really easy opportunity to come in and say, hey, wait a second. No students are choosing 30 minutes here. So this is not a multiple choice option that reflects an actual misconception that students have. Whether we're seeing that here or when we're browsing the open question bank, these are really, really good opportunities to just make these items, let's say, incrementally better. So let's take a look at how we can build one of these from the ground up. So we're going to go back to our assessment templates. We're going to say new assessment here. So we're going to say biology 20, circulatory system quiz, say. Again, we have some of the same options here. So we've got some choice on what information we ask the students for. We've got some layout stuff. Down here, we've got what's probably more important and new. So in terms of the numbering, we have some options. By default, your questions are numbered sequentially. So it's just sort of like 1, 2, 3, 4, right to the end of the assessment. We can also number by type. So in a diploma exam, we might have like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then numeric response 1, and then 5, 6, 7. So we can number it that way. Again, especially if you're interested in making sure that when students see the diploma, they're not seeing anything new, that might be a really good choice. And that'll take care of those sort of tags that say numeric response or whatever for you as well. We can also label our parts A, B, C. So this is if we were doing like a more informal assessment, then maybe if we had, instead of having a big box for the context that says use this for the next 3 questions, we would have like 1 and then some text and then A, a question, B, a question, and so on. So I'm going to leave that at our default here. For our multiple choice format, by default, this thing arranges the columns to try to save you paper. You can also go to 1 column if you want, especially for anybody who's in social studies, if you want to do pyramid shuffling, so that the questions are either from smallest answer to largest or from largest to smallest, then there that is for you as well. If we are doing paper assessments, we have a choice on whether we get those students' written responses on the response form, on the question book, or somewhere else. So maybe you're giving them paper to do their responses. And then finally, we have a choice on whether those pieces, so like the use the following information, whether those pieces are generated in English or in French. If you have another language that you're using in your classes that you would like to see here, then let me know right now. These are the only 2 that we've got, but with just like a handful of translations, I'd love to support whatever you guys are using in your classes. Finally, over on scoring, we have the same options we had before, so we can make this template scored just sort of conventionally or with weighted sections or with weighted outcomes. I'm just going to say save. And here we go. We have an empty assessment template. We can add a section to start. We can make that specific to multiple choice, numeric response, or written response, or we can make that a mixed type section. So I'm going to choose a mixed type section because it's going to let us choose whatever kind of questions we want and mix those up if we like. We'll just leave all of this at the defaults. But again, we do have some options here. And then we're going to say add items and choose from bank to add some items here. So when we're adding items, again, we have those 3 places. We have our own folders, we have communities, we have the open question bank. So I don't have anything in my own folders here or communities for circulatory system. So we're going to lean heavily on the open question bank, which I think will probably work very well anyway. We have a choice down here on whether we're looking for like multiple choice, numeric response, or written response. So we can filter there if we want to. And then we can say, let's say, chambers of the heart, and then we'll go biology 20. When we're looking at items, one of the really important things that I want to point out is that right up at the top here, we have the difficulty and the discrimination listed. So when you search the open question bank, it is always sorted from, oh, that's lovely too. It is always sorted from the highest discrimination questions to the lowest. So the idea is that when you're searching for an item, you shouldn't have to search 128,000 questions to find like a circulatory system question that you can use today. Again, one of the advantages of the open bank and of sharing to it is that even though we haven't used these items before, somebody else has. So say on a diploma exam, we would never, or we would very, very rarely use items that are what we call raw, that haven't been tested with students. It would be really nice if we could do more of that in our classes, and this is our opportunity to do that. So we can look and just really briefly, and again, we'll give more detail on this tomorrow, but that difficulty looks pretty good. The discrimination here, discrimination is a number that unless we've made a big mistake, goes from 0 to 1. And if you like, 0 is not that great. The students are not understanding what they're being asked for. 1 is like, this is just an amazing, amazing question. So 0.5 is actually really good. If you, again, have worked with something like a diploma exam, this is going to very nearly correspond to the CRPB. So we can add that question. So we're going to select that. Down here, we saw something. So again, here we have a multiple choice question where some of these are not being chosen by students. And so we could look at this and say, oh, you know what, actually, yeah, that's a weird misconception to be testing. I think I have a better idea. And we can select that. We can look and say, so let's do a different search here. We can look at actual, say, blood circulation. So here's a nice numeric response question. We can take that. And again, really good discrimination, really good difficulty. And so we know right out of the gates that this is going to go well. I'm just going to say add. Let's take a look at what we've got there already. So we've got like a 4-question test or quiz already, just sort of really quickly. If we take this question here and we say, oh, actually, so which heart or which chamber receives blood from pulmonary circulation? Nobody is choosing 5. We can say, okay, so why is that? We can actually then edit this question and say, okay, I'm actually going to take this and say, instead of 5, I can ask something else. We have this sorting by discrimination, which makes it so the questions you are most likely to see, the questions you are most likely to be presented with, are the ones that are performing the strongest in other classrooms. We have an opportunity to make small changes to those items. And when we change an item that's in the open question bank, the changed one goes back into the open question bank. So what my hope is that the open question bank and sharing to the open question bank gives us an opportunity to build questions that better reflect students' misunderstandings, that better reflect what students do know, than any of us could have built individually. So we've got some questions here. Let's take a look. So let's say that we want our numeric response question here to be always the last question. One of the things that we can do, or the thing that we can do for that, is we can add a shuffle break. So we click on add shuffle break, and then we can drag that up here. And what's going to happen now is every time that we shuffle this assessment, one of those first 2 questions is going to be the first one. But always this last one is going to stay at the end. So nothing ever crosses a shuffle break. And again, this gets us an opportunity to control the flow of this assessment a little bit. We also want to look at learning outcomes. So for example, chambers of the heart. And so we have both of these, or I guess the first one only is a chambers of the heart question. So I'm going to say save. And there we go. That's now flagged as being that. We can say this one is circulation. Save. And just like that, right? So we can come through and we can choose our outcomes for each of the questions that we've got. Oh, there's another chambers of the heart. So we can actually just hit plus. And now we've got that one flagged as a chambers of the heart question as well. So really easy to add those outcomes. And again, when we build versions, that's going to be reflected there. If we were building this into a quiz, what we could do then, if we were doing, say, a paper version, is we can shuffle. Once we've got a shuffle that we're like, oh, that looks pretty good, we can do a preview. And the preview is actually going to generate the PDF that students will see. So it's our opportunity to look and say, is this, yeah, so we don't have any of those weird things like one question winding up on its own page or something like that. Once we've got a version that we like, that's where we're going to go to our build. And if we're building a paper version, that's where that is. So we're just going to say build paper version. We have an opportunity to say this is version A. We can just say build. And now we're someplace that should be really familiar. So like, this is the name that just we see. So we can call that, say, circulatory A. This is exactly what we saw when we built a response form earlier. And the reason is that what this thing has done is it's just built us a response form. It's got a question book attached to it. You can see our field for our student name is now saying first name because we changed that. And we can just say save. And there we go. So we've got our multiple choice section. We've got our numeric response section. We can say, so we can print a question book, for example. And we can say, actually, let's do a response form at the front of that, build. And now what we've got is right up front here is our response form that students are going to use. We have a blank page after that, so you can print this two-sided, and then our quiz. So if we had a longer test, we would have something now where students could just pull off that front page, fill that in. Again, they give that back to you filled. You take those papers, scan them in, and then you're ready to upload that and get your results just that easily. And again, we have some options. So we can print with or print that form separately if we want, print it at the front, at the back. We can also, so we didn't look at this before, but we can print a form from a class list. So if we have a class list that we want to paste in here, and these are already filled in now, and students can just go ahead and use those, I guess. Maybe the other thing that I want to see if I can demonstrate here. Yeah, so if I take away that field for the student name, so we do have the ability, especially if you're doing, say, like a final exam where you already want to have all of the students' forms filled in with names, we can get rid of that field for the student name, say save. And now if we do that print from a class list, typing problems today, there we go. If we do that print from a class list, what we're going to see is that this now comes up with a QR code up here. And what's going to happen is when you scan these in, the system will just read that QR code, find out who this student is. And this lets you include whatever information you want in that class list so that sort of gets passed along. So there we go. There's our paper version. We can, like I say, take that, print it off, hand it out to students, just like we showed with the last one. The last thing that I want to look at here is the online sittings. One of the advantages here is that if we've got this assessment template built, it is really easy to just the same way that we built a paper version, we can build an online version. What this means for you is that if you've got your paper version that you're going to be giving to students today, and then that morning you get an email from a student that says, I can't be in class today, you have an opportunity to say, okay, so during that same block of time, I'm going to have you write an online sitting. And it's really easy to set up because it's just the same template. We come to build an online sitting and we're ready to go. So whether we're sort of administering a larger assessment, maybe in class on laptops, or a formative assessment at home, or whether we're helping out one or two students with the ability to get this assessment in who can't make it into the class, online sitting is really, really easy to build in tandem with the paper stuff. So again, we have that opportunity to say this is an online sitting here, build. And now we have some options here. So we have, when is this thing going to open? We can say now, we can specify a date and time. We can give a start code, sort of like you would with a field test. Let's say now. The close, so we can close this at a particular time. The time between the open and the close is not going to be how long students have. That's how long it's available to them. In terms of the time limit, so this would be how long students have, and we can say that time limit is 20 minutes, or we can give no time limit if we want. We can do more than one attempt if we want, depending on what we're doing with this assessment. We have a student note here. So if we wanted, for instance, to tell students, hey, make sure you've got your data book or something like that, anything that we want them to see before they start the assessment, this is a good place to put that. Over here, we have a bunch of options. So the first stuff here is, I think, a lot of what we have for security. So we have the option of shuffling each attempt. The only place where I can imagine so far that we would uncheck that, but I'm sure that people come across other situations. If you have a student, for instance, who's writing from home, but who as part of their accommodations needs a reader, then this is something where you can actually say, okay, I don't want to shuffle that. And now what your student sees is going to be exactly what you see in the sitting here. We have different ways of letting students move through the assessment. So we can either show them the full assessment. By default, we just show them one item at a time, but they can move around however they want. If we're looking for a little more security, then we can do a single item at a time, and they're just moving to the next item each time. If you are forced into a place where you have a large number of students who are writing from home, then it's possible that one of your most important tools in building security into that is going to be this next only. So that comes with compromises, because of course students like to skip questions and come back to them as they should, but where it has to be done, that can be really good for security. This I really like. So reasoning prompts, especially if we're doing a pure online assessment, we have an opportunity to say, for example, for all multiple choice and numeric response questions, we want students to have an opportunity to say, here's what my reasoning is. And this can be a good place for you to understand what students' misconceptions are. It can also be a really good place for students to demonstrate that this is their answer. So we'll see that in just a moment when we're looking at the student side of this. Finally, with the remaining time here, we can say we want to give students like a warning, say at 10 minutes and 5 minutes left, and that'll just bring up a gentle banner. Before we leave the settings here, our results, this is where we have the opportunity to say, what do we give to students and when do we give that to them? So by default, students are told what their score is and their score on any outcomes that we've defined right as soon as they submit their responses. We could, for example, say we actually don't want them to see that right away. We want to say, once we've actually closed it, then we want students to see those two things. So what's going to happen now is for their scoring and for their outcomes, they're going to see that only once the whole sitting is closed. So once nobody can put in any responses. We can maybe, for example, we could say, okay, those things we want them to see when it's submitted. But then after everybody has done this, when that sitting closes, we would really like them to have an opportunity to see that question book. We'll talk a bunch more about security tomorrow, but one of the things that I want to really stress, I think often when people are making this choice, they're sort of by habit, making it from a security standpoint. I want to stress that if you are giving an online assessment, your assumption should be that when the students have done that assessment, they have a copy of it. So whether or not we show them the question book is less about security and more about whether or not this fits our goals. Do we think that it's going to make the students focus too much on the questions, or do we actually want them to have an opportunity to use those? And a piece of that, for instance, if we have the outcomes available to them and the questions, one of the things that this is going to do is it's going to give them an opportunity to click on the outcomes to see which questions relate to that outcome. And so if that's a capability that you want your students to have, this can be a really nice place to do that. So we have a lot of options here. Let's sort of leave those there. We have this opening now, so we'll be able to use this as an example. We'll just hit save. And there's our setup here. So in terms of student access, we have a couple of ways that students can access this. One is using student accounts. And so if I add, for instance, student@smartermarks.com, and then let's also do, say, a different kind of student email address here. If I say add, so what's going to happen when you add students using a student account? If they have already got an account, then they're going to show up under this validated accounts. If they have not already got an account that they've validated, it works the same way as when you signed up for an account. So what's going to happen is this student has received an email that has a link in it, that they need to click in order to verify their email and sort of continue. We can resend that email if we want here, or if your student has missed it the first time, if they just click on forgot my password under the login prompts, then we'll send them an email that works just as well for that job. Once this student has actually done that validation, they will show up down in this list here. So as long as they're up here, they don't have access to the assessment, they need to do that piece. So we'll just delete this one because we don't really want that student in here. We're going to take a look at it here. But the other way that we can access this is through a shareable link, or share this is through a shareable link. So a shareable link is just this link here that if you click here, you can copy it. We can copy this link, share it with students, or they can actually just type in these last 5 letters here, and we'll see where they can do that. If they do that, they're going to almost get access to the assessment. They're going to need just one other piece of information in order to get access. And so that could be the name. The name might be problematic because maybe we sort of disagree on capitalization or something. And so, for instance, we can say just for this security piece, we're going to ask for student IDs. And we can have a list of student IDs here where every student, wow, those are very similar, where every student who clicks on this link, before they get access to the assessment, they're going to be asked for their student ID, and they have to give one of the IDs that are here. The other way that we can use this, if we're sort of like at the last second, just saying, I just need to give this student access, we can say something like this. So as long as the students are entering one of the things that are in this list, they will get access to the assessment. The advantage of using those student accounts is that students can log in at any time to view their results. Students can look at assessments that are upcoming. They can look at the results of assessments they have in the past. Students who are using a shareable link can do the same, but they have to be accessing it from the same computer that they used the first time. They have to have not cleared cookies, a bunch of things like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cancel here. And like I say, we'll use that student account to take a look at what this looks like from the student end. And then as our final piece, we'll come back, we'll take a look at the teacher side of this and get some idea sort of briefly of what kind of feedback we get as teachers. So I'm going to log out. I'm going to log in with the student account. So right away, it says we have a new item that's waiting for us. If we had something in that, that information we're giving students before they see it, that would come up down at the bottom here. We can just say open, start new attempt. There's where we would see results if we'd already done this. Put in my name. And then as soon as this is available, we're going to see start now. If we come in here before it's available, we'll get sort of like a waiting and how long we have to wait. So we're good to go. I'm going to say start now. And there's our assessment. So up at the top here, we've got how long we have left to do this. We can hide that if we're sort of shy about that. We chose to see just one item at a time. And so here we have our first item, which has sort of those 2 parts to it. So we can choose an answer here, and we can say like 3 is a pulmonary, oh goodness, artery. It's been a while, my apologies. So there we go. So we can have students give some kind of reasoning. We can choose our answers here. Every time that we have an answer that's saved, it's going to come up with this little banner at the bottom that just sort of gently says saved. Once students have seen that, that means that their answer has already been saved on our server and it's sort of confirmed back to them. So when we finish this whole assessment, we will get like a submit button, but they never need to hit that submit button. So if they just sort of finish the assessment and then don't click anything, or they don't finish the assessment, all of those things that they've already done will be saved anyway. We can do this out of order because of the way that we've chosen this. We can choose our response here. And again, we can put in reasoning here if we want. So we can come back here, and before we give the answer to that, we can say, oh, you know what, actually, so chamber of the heart for pumping blood to the body. What we can do is we can say new tab. We can search on Google, and And we're saying left ventricle pumps things out to the rest of the body. So we can say, ah, sweet, there's my answer. Left ventricle, because, and we can put our answer in there, right? And I want to do that so we can look back and see some of the stuff. And again, maybe we'll do a little more detail on this tomorrow, but some of the stuff around security that we have as options. Once we've got answers for everything, we will have that submit button if we want. So we can say submit, sure, submit and close. And now, just like we wanted, so we've got our outcomes and our scores visible right away. If we checked off that question book, then when that question book becomes available, this is where we would see that as well and have the option of clicking on any outcome to see which questions those are. So what I'm going to do is we're going to log out and come back to our teacher here. We're going to go to our online settings. There's our biocirculation. Edit that and look at our results. And here we go. So if we had more than one attempt, that's where we would have these up here. Down below, we have the whatever details we're showing for this. So by default, we're looking at the assessment that's been all scored here. We've got check marks, we've got here's our reasoning. And so the reasoning is not something where you have to come in and score this as another written response question. It's something that you can sort of breeze through really quickly and say, that does not count as reasoning. That's a little weird, for example. We have a bunch of other stuff that we can look at here. So if we need an answer key for this, we have an answer key for this student's specific version right here. We can look at how this student did on individual outcomes. And then the last piece here is the events plot. So this to me is where a lot of the power of security, such as we can have it in an online setting, is available. So because we're showing students just one question at a time, we know when they viewed each question. We have dots here whenever they change their response, so we can get some sense of how they're navigating this that way. We have a student here who skipped one question, but it's not that unusual. They just came back to it. One of the places where this is really powerful is if we have a student who, if we're doing full shuffle on versions and we have a student who's following somebody else's version, then this will just look like a field of asteroids moving across or whatever. It will be totally random and you'll look at it and right away think this student is not doing anything I've seen students do before. The other thing we've got here is this grayed out area. We can see where the student was off the tab. And so if that's something that we want to talk to the student about, then this can be a really good place to have that conversation around academic integrity, for example. Down here, we have sort of some basic events. If we have more than one device, so if somebody else is logging into this thing, this is where we'd see that as well. We would have dots come in like a blue, I think is the next color. One sort of warning, sometimes if you're doing tests at a school, school internet seems to occasionally change where students seem to be. And so this is not necessarily something that, that means that somebody else is logging in. Just to finish up then, I want to thank everybody again for coming out. I really appreciate your sharing your time with us. And again, please let me know if you have any questions as you start using this.